Welcome. Today I want to talk about a common challenge in the workplace and with project teams. It's engagement. Now, as you may know, Gallup has been tracking engagement for over 20 years, and on average in the United States, only 30% of individuals give their best effort. These are the ones who are happy and productive and create that positive environment we all enjoy. They are the people in the front of the boat. But unfortunately, 50% of employees are going along for the ride. They're equally happy, but they're happy because they're not doing anything unless someone tells them what to do, tells them how to do it, and then follows up to make sure they did it. And then 20% are in the back of the boat, drilling a hole. We call these the toxic twins. And during the pandemic, that number rose to 30%. The challenge that we have is identifying these people. Now, it's easy to spot the A players, but it can be challenging to identify the other types of employees. Now, I've been working on a framework with our Genius Spark efforts, and the framework will give you categories for your managers and the type of team members that these managers develop. Managers are the linchpin or the Achilles heel of every organization, and during the pandemic, many managers turned out to be that Achilles heel. Not only did they have to direct work, but they had to become life coaches as well. And Gallup says that only 20% of managers have the mindset and the skills to be that developmental coach and help their employees grow into their roles. 80% of managers are more task-oriented. They direct work, they troubleshoot, and they hold accountability. I've created a matrix for managers based on two continuums. On one continuum, we have transactional managers on the left, meaning they don't build relationships and are more like traffic cops or babysitters. And on the right, we have relational managers who build rapport with their employees, care about them as individuals, and create environments of trust. On the other continuum, at the top, we have managers who focus on developing capacity of their team by developing the skills and the confidence of the individuals on the team. And then on the bottom, those who are more focused on outcomes and getting things done. Now, when I was a manager, my natural tendency was to focus more on the relational and performance quadrant. The good news is that we can all change and grow, and I've developed into that relational coach in the upper right quadrant over the years. When I break down Gallup's number and my own experience, I find that about 5% of managers are in that standout category in the upper right. They build strong relationships and they help individuals grow, and therefore the team grows. About 15% are in the bottom right. They build strong relationships, but they tend to be heroes, coming to the rescue, troubleshooting, solving problems with their employees. That was my trap. When I was a young manager, my employees became very dependent upon me because I had all the answers and I was ready to jump in, solve the problems. But it came at a high price to me and my family. I spent lots of time and hours, felt stress, and my employees were not growing. I refer to the managers in the upper left quadrant as the boss. This is about 15% of managers, and they are transactional, almost like detached teachers or coach. They're demanding, but it doesn't feel like they're looking out for your interest or that they care about you. In the bottom left, this is where employees are more likely to quit because these managers are transactional and hands-off, but demanding, performance-driven. I call these the taskmasters. In contrast, managers in the upper right, the guides, have a light touch and focus on consistent growth. So when we look at these different tendencies, we see in that upper right quadrant, the guide, about 5% of managers, has a light touch and produces employees that have agency. In other words, they feel like they control their success. Managers in the bottom right are relational, performance-driven. they come to the rescue, and what that produces are employees that feel disempowered. When we go into the upper left, the boss, they micromanage and they demand high performance, and these employees become actively disengaged or toxic. And this upper left quadrant is the biggest threat to the team in the long run because it represents about 20% of employees that become disengaged and toxic. And the tone that they bring to the team brings everybody down, and you cannot overcome that toxic effect. Think of it like gravity. It's easier to pull someone down than for that 30% in the front of the boat to pull the toxic people up. When we drop down to the bottom left quadrant, these managers produce employees that feel abandoned, and they will quit. And it may be a coincidence, but of those who quit, 65% say it's their direct supervisor. When we look at the bottom two quadrants that are performance driven, we've got the relational performance oriented managers, about 15%, and the transactional performance oriented managers, about 65%. So that represents about 80%. When we look at the left side, we find at the top the boss who micromanages and has demanding expectations, creating the 20% of employees in an organization that are toxic. And then the bottom, you've got those task-oriented, hands-off managers, which create most employees who leave. You have this interesting dynamic that you have toxic employees who will stay, and then at the bottom, unengaged employees who will leave. This transactional side is the biggest threat to your teams and your organizations. Now we have the right side. In the top left, you've got the guide, who is the relational growth-oriented manager, and bottom. And at the bottom, the relational performance-oriented manager. So now we have a very good overview of the different kinds of managers that you have and the kinds of employees that they will likely produce. As we look at the right side, we can look at the upper right, your guides, about 5% of your managers, and then at the bottom, about 15% of your managers, and they are relational and performance driven. And now we'll look at the top half. And the top half, you have on the right-hand side the guide, on the left-hand side the boss, again, about 20% of your managers. So this gives us a good framework. And now what I'd like to do is move us into looking at these in terms of a red light, yellow light, green light for you to focus on. Now in this next graphic, I have highlighted the green light, the yellow light, and the red light, and added the kind of employees that these categories create. In the upper right, you have those highly engaged front of the boat employees that come every day with their A game. The bottom right, you have those in the middle of the boat, the yellow, which needs improvement. And that yellow category consists of employees that are coasting. They're happy. They'll do a good job if you tell them what to do, how to do it, and then follow up and make sure they did it. But they're basically coasting. And then the red light categories. In the bottom left, those employees are likely to quit. And then the upper left, those employees are likely to stay, but stay toxic in the organization. Finally, here are some of the things you can do as interventions to improve these categories. For the hero manager, they need to develop self-awareness, self-regulation so they don't jump in and rescue, some basic coaching skills. They need to understand their strengths and the strengths of others. If we go to the bottom left, we really need to ask the question, should these people be managers in the first place? And if so, then they need very basic skills, coaching skills. They really need to understand their strengths, to understand the style, how to optimize the way they're wired to coach others, and a deep understanding of the differences and the strengths of others. And then finally, the boss producing those toxic employees, they need to develop soft skills, understand how to develop psychological safety. They need to learn how to coach, not direct and dictate. They need to know how they're wired to be successful in this role and play to their strengths. And they deeply need to understand the strengths and appreciate those strengths in others. So as I finish, what I'd like to do is leave you with a blank matrix so that you can begin to think about the managers in your organization and just plot them up along the line. No manager is clearly in one category or the other. We're all along these continuums. And again, part of what I need to remind myself and others is that each person does this uniquely based on how they're wired. So I hope this is a helpful guide to first assess where your managers are, to look at their employees, to look back at some of the employees that you've lost or some of the employees that have been toxic. Then you can begin to look at what interventions are needed to help move them more and more into that upper right-hand quadrant, the relational growth-oriented guide. Take care.